This is a very exciting time for Canadians who love to have Canadian teams in the NHL playoffs. For the first time since 2004, 5 Canadian clubs are contending for Lord Stanley's Cup. I'm joined by Ian McIntyre of the Vancouver Sun and Scott STINSON of the National Post to ask this most critical question: which Canadian team goes the furthest? Let's start with Scott in Toronto.
I'm going to pick the rival Ottawa Senators to, of course, where I am in Toronto, and the reason for that is they have been playing playoff hockey for what seems like forever. If you look at the last 6 weeks, they've basically been the best team in the league. I think that's the kind of thing that could ultimately end up helping them in a playoff run, where they've been playing desperate type hockey for a long time. Andrew Hammond is obviously playing great in goal, and I just think it's the kind of thing that could keep working in their favor. Montreal, their first round opponent, is kind of the opposite, where they played great earlier and they've been on a bit of a downslide for a while, so I could see them being vulnerable to a team like Ottawa that comes in all guns blazing, upsetting them, and then you're on to the second round, and who knows what goes from there.
Sorry, Scott, do you think that the Senators could actually then advance past Tampa or Detroit in the second round?
I think if you get to a point where, you know, it could happen, where Ottawa, if they get through, you know, they upset Montreal, obviously as a big sort of home ice team, I could see it happening. I mean, the thing that I think works in Ottawa's favor is sort of what they've done this far is so improbable that why wouldn't they keep doing the improbable at this point?
All right, Ian McIntyre, you're in Vancouver. Of course, the Canucks are taking part in the playoffs. What's your thought? Who's the Canadian team to go the furthest?
Well, I'm going to hedge my bets. And luckily, with 5 teams, I actually have the ability to hedge my bets. I think it's really interesting what's happening in the Pacific Division playoff bracket. Winnipeg, of course, has crossed over as a wildcard team. So you've got 3 of 4 teams, including Vancouver and Calgary, all in this one bracket. I think there's an excellent chance that Winnipeg is going to knock out Anaheim in the first round, which means no matter who wins between Vancouver and Calgary, you have an all-Canadian second round, which means you have a Canadian team in the conference final. So if I have to pick that one team, maybe I'll pick Winnipeg, but I think there's a very good chance that out of this bracket, you're going to have a Canadian team in the conference final. And with 5 teams, wouldn't it be awesome if there was an all-Canadian final?
You know what, before this season started, Ian, I don't think any of us would have predicted that any of those 3 teams would be in the Western Conference Finals, so that's an interesting call. I wanted to ask you guys before we leave, why is it so important to us as Canadians that a Canadian team, or that lots of Canadian teams make the playoffs and that they do well? What does it matter?
Well, I tell you, I think...
Why do you have to ask that question?
I think the one
Canadian.
The one group that definitely wants to see a Canadian team go as far as possible is Rogers, who owns the broadcast rate. $5 billion, they got a lot of bills to pay.
You know, it has been a transition year for Canadian hockey on television, but you know, 5 teams out of 16, that's great. But Jonathan, I'm just surprised you have to answer that question. Why does it matter? It's our sport. It's our game. We're more deeply invested, both emotionally and financially, than anywhere else. So we live and die by hockey in springtime.
Well, you know, gentlemen, I might live in Vancouver, but I grew up in Edmonton, and here's the worst part. I'm thrilled that the Flames are in the playoffs, and it's making me cry. It's making me weep inside. Thank you for joining me.